The movie begins with a hauntingly quiet ghost town, abandoned and crumbling under the weight of the American Civil War. The sun blazes relentlessly, casting long shadows over the dilapidated buildings. Dust swirls in the distance, the only sign of movement in this barren wasteland. The air is thick with tension as three bounty hunters, hardened by years of tracking down criminals, cautiously approach a rundown saloon. Inside, Tuco Ramirez, a notorious bandit with a reputation as deadly as it is infamous, sits in a chair, completely at ease. His revolver glints in the low light as he casually cleans it, seemingly unaware of the danger closing in around him. The bounty hunters move silently, their hands hovering near their weapons, ready for the inevitable confrontation. The tension in the air is palpable, each second stretching out as they inch closer. But before they can make their move, Tuco explodes into action. With a speed that defies belief, he draws his revolver and fires, the sound of gunshots shattering the eerie silence. Bullets fly in all directions as the saloon becomes a war zone. Tuco is a whirlwind of motion, taking down two of the bounty hunters with lethal precision. The third, barely alive, crawls away, leaving a trail of blood as he desperately tries to escape the wrath of the bandit. Tuco watches him for a moment, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, before turning his attention back to his revolver as if nothing had happened. Miles away, the camera shifts to a different scene, a small, quiet farmhouse surrounded by dust and dry fields. Inside, the mood is just as tense, but far more controlled. Angel Eyes, a cold-blooded mercenary known for his ruthless efficiency, sits across from an old man named Stevens. The flickering light from a nearby lantern casts shadows on their faces as Stevens nervously fidgets, his fingers trembling slightly. He knows the danger he's in. Angel Eyes leans forward, his gaze piercing as he questions Stevens about a man named Jackson. Stevens, his voice shaky, explains that Jackson, who now goes by the alias Bill Carson, has vanished, taking with him a fortune in stolen Confederate gold. Angel Eyes listens in silence, his expression unreadable, though the calculating glint in his eyes betrays his thoughts. After a long pause, a slow, cruel smile spreads across Angel Eyes' face. Without a word, he stands and draws his revolver. Stevens, realizing what's about to happen, panics and tries to bargain for his life. He offers Angel Eyes a hefty sum to kill his own employer, a man named Baker, thinking it might buy him some time. But Angel Eyes is not a man to be swayed by money or mercy. With a cold efficiency, he pockets the cash and, in the same motion, pulls the trigger. The gunshot echoes through the house, and Stevens slumps forward, dead. Before the sound has even faded, Stevens' son bursts into the room, eyes wide with shock. He doesn't even have time to scream before Angel Eyes turns his gun on him, firing once more. The son falls to the floor beside his father, lifeless. Angel Eyes surveys the scene with a detached calm, his work here done. But his bloodthirsty mission is far from over. True to his merciless nature, Angel Eyes heads straight for Baker, the man who hired him. Baker, blissfully unaware of what's about to unfold, greets Angel Eyes with a broad grin, confident that the mercenary has brought him the information he needs about Jackson. But Angel Eyes has no intention of fulfilling his contract. Instead, he draws his revolver for the third time and, without hesitation, shoots Baker dead, erasing any loose ends that might tie him to the stolen gold. Meanwhile, across the unforgiving desert, Tuco is once again on the run. His name is feared far and wide, and bounty hunters seem to appear out of nowhere, eager to claim the price on his head. This time, however, as his latest group of pursuers closes in, something, or rather, someone, interrupts their hunt. A lone figure appears on the horizon, walking with a confident, measured stride. It's Blondie, a mysterious gunman known for his unmatched speed and deadly accuracy. The bounty hunters barely have time to react before Blondie draws his revolver, the sound of gunfire ringing out like thunder. Within seconds, the bounty hunters are dead, their bodies lying in the dust. Tuco, initially relieved, quickly realizes that Blondie didn't save him out of the goodness of his heart. No, Blondie has his own plans. He turns Tuco into the local authorities, collecting the $2,000 bounty on his head without a second thought. The scene shifts to a grimy, sun-bleached town where Tuco is dragged in front of the townsfolk, who jeer and hurl insults at him. His hands are bound, and he's marched toward the gallows, the noose dangling ominously in the hot, dry air. As the executioner reads out the charges against him, Tuco stands tall, his face betraying no fear. In fact, a sly grin plays on his lips as he scans the crowd. He knows something they don't. Just as the executioner prepares to release the trapdoor, a single gunshot pierces the air. The rope snaps, and Tuco falls to the ground, alive. The townspeople gasp in shock as Tuco scrambles to his feet and bolts for cover. In a narrow alleyway, he finds Blondie, casually counting the reward money, completely unfazed by the chaos he's just caused. It's then that the truth is revealed. Blondie and Tuco have been working together all along. It's a scam, and a profitable one at that. Blondie turns Tuco in, collects the bounty, and then frees him, splitting the money between them before moving on to the next town to repeat the con. For a while, their partnership is lucrative, and Tuco's bounty grows with each town they scam. Eventually, Tuco's head is worth a staggering $3,000. But as with all things, the partnership begins to sour. Blondie grows tired of Tuco's constant complaints and insatiable greed. The final straw comes during one of their routine escapes. After collecting the bounty once more, Blondie decides it's time to sever ties with his unpredictable partner. In the blistering heat of the desert, Blondie abandons Tuco, taking all the money and leaving him to die. The sun beats down mercilessly as Tuco stumbles through the vast desert, his throat dry, his skin burning under the unforgiving heat. Dehydrated and on the brink of collapse, he curses Blondie's name with every painful step. His journey through the desert is agonizing, each moment a battle for survival. Days pass before Tuco finally stumbles into a small, dusty town. His once sharp eyes are now hollow, his lips cracked and bleeding. But despite the toll the desert has taken on him, one thing burns brighter than ever: his desire for revenge. He arms himself with a new revolver, his mind set on one thing: finding Blondie and making him pay. Sometime later, Tuco finally tracks Blondie to another town. This time, he's not alone. 3 hired guns flank him, men he's paid well to ensure that Blondie doesn't walk away from this encounter alive. The scene escalates with tension as Blondie and Tuco make their way toward the dynamite-laden bridge, each holding the other's secret close to their chest. The darkened sky overhead crackles with the distant sound of cannon fire as they work silently, the glow of lanterns casting long shadows across their faces. Both men know that after the bridge is destroyed, their tenuous partnership will be shattered, and only one will walk away with the fortune in Confederate gold. As they finish rigging the dynamite, they face each other for the first time since their reunion, each calculating their next move. With a grim nod, Blondie lights the fuse. They retreat to a safe distance as the ground beneath them rumbles. In a deafening explosion, the bridge collapses into the river below, taking with it the hopes of both Union and Confederate forces. The soldiers, now with no reason to continue the fight, begin to retreat from the battlefield, clearing the path to Sad Hill Cemetery. Blondie and Tuco, now fully aware that the endgame is near, continue their journey toward the cemetery, the tension between them growing with each step. Along the way, they encounter the remnants of the battle: injured soldiers, abandoned artillery, and a landscape scorched by war. But nothing can deter them now. They have come too far, and the lure of the gold is too strong. Finally, after days of travel, they arrive at the sprawling cemetery of Sad Hill, where thousands of graves stretch out before them in an endless sea of stone markers. The wind whistles through the barren landscape, adding an eerie undertone to the final confrontation that is about to unfold. Tuco, desperate to claim the gold first, frantically searches the gravestones for the one named on Blondie's lips. His breath quickens as he sprints from grave to grave, his eyes wild with greed. Blondie, calm and composed, watches from a distance, knowing that Tuco's search is futile without the final piece of information. As Tuco nears the center of the cemetery, his eyes fall upon a grave marked with the name Arch Stanton, the name that Blondie had whispered to him before they destroyed the bridge. His heart races as he grabs a shovel, ready to unearth the fortune that has driven him to the edge of madness. But as Tuco begins to dig, Blondie approaches slowly, his hand resting on his revolver. The air is thick with anticipation as Tuco digs furiously, the dirt flying in all directions. Finally, his shovel strikes something solid. He laughs triumphantly, knowing he has found the gold. But when he opens the coffin, his laughter dies in his throat. There is no gold, only a skeleton, mocking him from beyond the grave. Tuco's face contorts with rage as he realizes he's been played. He whirls around to face Blondie, who stands calmly with a knowing smile. "Did you really think I'd make it that easy?" Blondie says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Before Tuco can react, the familiar sound of footsteps echoes across the cemetery. Blondie's smile fades as Angel Eyes steps into view, his eyes cold and calculating. He's been watching the entire time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now, with the gold within reach, he draws his revolver, ready to settle the score once and for all. A tense standoff ensues, with Blondie, Tuco, and Angel Eyes standing in a deadly triangle, each man's hand hovering near his gun. The wind picks up, kicking up dust around their feet as the three men lock eyes, knowing that only one will walk away with the gold. Time seems to slow as the tension builds to an unbearable level. Every muscle in their bodies is coiled, every breath shallow as they wait for the first man to make a move. Then, in a flash, all three men draw their guns. The sound of gunfire echoes through the cemetery, shattering the silence. When the dust clears, Angel Eyes lies dead, a bullet between his eyes. Blondie, ever the quick draw, stands victorious while Tuco, his gun still smoking, breathes a sigh of relief, having survived yet another deadly encounter. With Angel Eyes dead and the gold still hidden, Blondie turns to Tuco, his expression unreadable. "There's only one grave left to dig," Blondie says, his voice low and menacing. Tuco, realizing he has no other choice, reluctantly picks up his shovel once more and begins to dig the final grave. This time, the gold is real. As Tuco uncovers the treasure, his eyes widen in disbelief. The fortune they've been chasing for so long lies before them, glittering in the midday sun. But Blondie has one last trick up his sleeve. As Tuco reaches for the gold, Blondie knocks him out cold with a single punch, leaving him unconscious beside the open grave. When Tuco finally wakes, he finds himself standing on a rickety wooden crossbeam, his hands tied behind his back and a noose around his neck. Blondie, standing a few feet away, smirks as he ties the other end of the rope to a nearby tree. Tuco screams in protest, cursing Blondie's name as the realization sets in. Blondie is leaving him to die, just as he had left him in the desert. But as Blondie rides off into the distance, something unexpected happens. A single gunshot rings out, and the rope around Tuco's neck snaps, dropping him to the ground. Blondie, now little more than a silhouette on the horizon, has spared Tuco's life one final time, leaving him alive but penniless. Tuco, gasping for breath, watches as Blondie disappears into the distance, the gold strapped to his saddle. He curses Blondie's name once more, but deep down, he knows that their paths will cross again someday. The film ends as it began, with the desolate, war-torn landscape stretching out in all directions. The sun sets on the horizon, casting long shadows over the graves of Sad Hill Cemetery, a fitting end to a tale of betrayal, greed, and survival in the unforgiving wilderness of the American West. The story reaches its gripping climax as Tuco and Blondie, their uneasy alliance unraveling, continue their journey towards Sad Hill Cemetery, driven by the tantalizing promise of gold. Tuco's heart pounds as he races through the eerie silence of the sprawling graveyard, his eyes darting from one gravestone to the next. Desperation fuels his every step as he frantically searches for the grave marked Arch Stanton, the key to unlocking their shared fortune. His boots kick up dust as he runs faster, sweat dripping down his face in the harsh morning light. Finally, he spots it, the name carved into the weathered stone, Arch Stanton. Relief floods through him, but it's short-lived. Just as he grabs the shovel and begins to dig, he hears a familiar sound behind him, the soft click of a gun being cocked. Blondie, standing tall, his revolver aimed squarely at Tuco, steps forward. His calm demeanor only heightens the tension in the air. The unspoken understanding between them, that fragile bond built on necessity, has finally disintegrated. This is the end of their partnership. Tuco glares at Blondie, his hands tightening around the shovel, but before either man can act, a shadow falls over them. From the far edge of the cemetery, Angel Eyes emerges, his black hat casting a long, ominous silhouette. His piercing gaze moves from Tuco to Blondie, a sly smirk creeping across his face as he realizes that all three of them have arrived at the same deadly conclusion. Only one will leave this place alive with the gold. The tension thickens, the three men forming a deadly triangle in the middle of the graveyard. The only sounds are the soft creaks of leather holsters and the distant howl of the wind through the grave markers. Each man's hand hovers over his gun, eyes locked on the other's, calculating every move, every twitch. The silence is suffocating, as if time itself is holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable eruption of violence. The sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows over the tombstones, as if the dead themselves are watching, waiting to see who will survive. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the stillness shatters. A burst of gunfire cuts through the air like thunder. Blondie, ever the fastest, draws first, his hand a blur as he fires. Angel Eyes barely has time to react before the bullet finds its mark, and he crumples to the ground, dead before he hits the dirt. The echo of the shot lingers, a ghostly reminder of the violence that just unfolded. Tuco, stunned, reaches for his own gun, but in a sickening moment of realization, he discovers it's useless. Blondie had unloaded it earlier, leaving him defenseless. His face twists in rage and frustration as Blondie's cold, calculated plan falls into place. Blondie, still holding his revolver steady, orders Tuco to continue digging. There's no room for argument, no hope of escape. Defeated and humiliated, Tuco resumes his frantic digging, his breath heavy with exhaustion and anger. Dirt flies as the shovel hits the earth again and again until finally, with a dull thud, it strikes something solid. Tuco's eyes widen as he uncovers two large, weathered bags. He opens them, revealing piles of glittering coins, Confederate gold, more wealth than either of them could have imagined. But the moment is far from triumphant. Just as Tuco starts to think he might actually walk away with a share of the fortune, Blondie's demeanor shifts. Without warning, Blondie grabs a nearby rope, his actions swift and deliberate. Before Tuco can protest, Blondie slips the noose around his neck, his expression grim and unyielding. Tuco is dragged to his feet, his body trembling with fear and anger as Blondie secures the other end of the rope to a rickety wooden cross marking a nearby grave. Tuco struggles to keep his balance on the unstable crossbeam, his life literally hanging by a thread as Blondie steps back, his cold blue eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The bags of gold are now safely strapped to Blondie's horse, the coins jingling softly as if mocking Tuco's precarious situation. Tuco screams in fury, cursing Blondie's name, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. Blondie turns away, mounting his horse with an air of finality, ready to ride off into the horizon with the gold, leaving Tuco to his fate. The wind picks up again, swirling dust around the gravestones, adding an almost poetic cruelty to the moment. Tuco's legs tremble as he fights to stay upright, the noose tightening around his neck with every shaky breath. His voice, now hoarse from shouting, fades into a desperate whimper. As Blondie slowly begins to ride away, the camera pans across the desolate cemetery, capturing the vast emptiness of the landscape, a fitting backdrop for this deadly game of betrayal and greed. Just when it seems that all hope is lost, Blondie does something unexpected. He stops. Turning his horse around, he looks back at Tuco, who hangs helplessly from the noose. Their eyes meet one final time, and for a brief moment, something passes between them. Blondie, with his trademark calm, raises his revolver, taking careful aim. Tuco's heart pounds in his chest, unsure of what's about to happen. Then, with a sharp crack, the bullet flies through the air. The rope snaps, and Tuco falls to the ground, gasping for air as the noose falls limp around his neck. For a long moment, Tuco lies there, his chest heaving, his body trembling with the shock of his near-death experience. When he finally catches his breath, he scrambles to his feet, staring after Blondie in a mixture of disbelief and fury. Blondie, now little more than a distant figure on the horizon, rides off into the setting sun, his silhouette framed against the golden sky. The bags of gold swayed gently from his saddle, glinting in the fading light. Tuco, still reeling from the events that just transpired, lets out one final, guttural scream. He curses Blondie's name, his voice echoing through the silent cemetery, but deep down, he knows that he owes his life to the man who just walked away with the fortune. The realization hits him like a punch to the gut. Blondie, for all his cunning and ruthlessness, spared him yet again. And though the gold is gone, Tuco is alive, left alone in the graveyard with nothing but his anger and the haunting memory of his brush with death. As the camera zooms out, the vast expanse of Sad Hill Cemetery stretches out beneath the crimson sky, a testament to the greed, betrayal, and survival that have marked this journey. The graves stand silent, witnesses to the deadly game that has just played out among their ranks. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the tombstones as the credits begin to roll. Blondie rides off into the distance, the gold secured, and Tuco, beaten but alive, watches in silence. The final shot lingers on Tuco, standing alone in the graveyard, his expression a mixture of rage, confusion, and perhaps, though he would never admit it, a grudging respect for the man who outwitted him once again. The camera fades to black, leaving the audience with the image of a man who came so close to victory, only to be left with nothing but dust and memories. And thus, the tale of Tuco, Blondie, and Angel Eyes comes to a dramatic, pulse-pounding conclusion. For more epic stories of betrayal, revenge, and survival, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay tuned for more thrilling adventures.